This is a Tracking the Tropics update with the certified most accurate weather team at First Coast News.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm meteorologist Ross Mumal here with First Coast News and First Coast News Plus. We're giving you an update what is now potential Tropical Cyclone 19. The latest 4 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center just came out on this system. This is an area down in the central and eventually western Caribbean that not only the National Hurricane Center, but also our entire weather team here at First Coast News has been watching really over about the last 4 to 5 days. It's just kind of been a disorganized cluster of some thunderstorms and things like that, but it is gradually intensifying here. Again, this is the latest track, so pretty much going to be taking it due west. Its sustained winds right now are only at about 30 miles per hour, and it's going to head toward Central America, so the Honduras area, Belize, and then eventually the Yucatan Peninsula towards Mexico. But it's really just going to kind of meander around that area for much of the end of the week here, so tomorrow through the weekend, and then even into the early part of next week. But where exactly it goes within that entire cone of uncertainty will greatly dictate potentially how strong the storm is. For example, we're going to look at this much closer here. The storm ends up tracking a little bit further to the left of that center line. It's going to interact with much more of the land, meaning the storm will generally be much weaker. Now, if the storm tracks a little bit further to the right of that line, so a little bit more of an eastward track, we could see a stronger storm begin to develop right over those very, very warm ocean waters, and the upper air environment is going to be very, very conducive for this storm to develop. So again, for the time being, it's potential Tropical Cyclone 19, but we are expecting this storm to eventually at least become a tropical depression, if not a tropical storm, which then would make it named Sara. So definitely would not be surprised if it becomes Sara by really this time tomorrow even. So we're going to just kind of show you a couple different ingredients we're kind of working with here to help show what exactly is taking place. So we have the cold front that's eventually going to be making its way across the first coast here today and into tomorrow. That's going to bring us the cool down for the weekend. So a lot of dry air is going to be in place across much of the northern and central Gulf and pretty much all of the Florida Peninsula. But we're going to have this surge of tropical moisture up out of the western Caribbean, across Mexico, and into the Gulf of Mexico by really late Monday and then into Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, the other key thing here is going to be, you see, just off to the north of that, we're going to have a cold front and a pretty strong upper-level trough digging down across the lower southern plains, down across the deep south, and then eventually towards the deep southeast, down towards southeast Georgia and northeast Florida. That cold front and the speed at which it comes on through will definitely dictate, how quickly it picks up this potential tropical storm or system and eventually then moves it off towards the east. Now, this latest model, I believe this is the American GFS model, kind of shows the really trough and drier air and the cold front all combined together, kind of just ripping apart the system. So the tropical system was already going to be a little bit weaker. This track takes it a little bit further west over Central America and Mexico, so that land interaction is going to break it up a little bit. And then once this trough kind of rolls on through and that cold front picks it up and drags it to the northeast, it's going to be greatly weaker. Now, again, this is just what one model is trying to depict or show, so this is not necessarily going to be exactly what happens, but it is good news that this is a trend that we've been really seeing here over about the last 2 to 3 model runs. Here's a different way to show it to you. So I mentioned the upper air patterns, very, very conducive for development. Just off to the north of this potential low pressure system and tropical system, our upper level flow is going to be clockwise. So you can see those winds or those wind barbs rotating in a clockwise formation. That's going to be an upper level high pressure. So you need a strong low pressure at the surface, but also a very strong high pressure aloft in the atmosphere. And that's just off to the northwest and north of this system. That's going to be kind of where the tropical system's going to want to move to. That's going to allow it to grow vertically and intensify much, much more with that vertical height. But again, it might be limited depending on how long this system tracks over land. Again, this current model takes it right over the Yucatan with the storm interacting with some of that higher terrain there, not going to be over those very, very warm ocean waters. That's going to, weaken the storm. It's not going to be having nearly as much fuel to feed itself and to grow off of. Another point being the waters very, very close, to the shoreline are going to be significantly cooler than they are several miles offshore. So that's also something to keep in mind as we watch to see where that center of the track is really going to be. If it's just right along the coastline or onshore, much weaker. If it's a little bit further east, it's out over those open, very, very warm ocean waters yet. It could strengthen pretty quickly. So we're talking about whether, if it's over land, it could just be a tropical depression or tropical storm and bring a ton of rain to Central America and Mexico. Or if it's a little further east, it stays out over the open waters and eventually tracks up through the Yucatan Channel there between Mexico and Cuba. We could be talking about, a category 2, 3, maybe even 4 hurricane, depending on how quickly that storm intensifies. But again, the upper level system, it's going to be that big dip in the jet stream, that trough digging across the central part of the country. That's eventually what is going to pick this system up and then pull it off to the northeast. So really the big uncertainty is going to be past the weekend and as we look ahead to next week. So here's just a kind of another way to depict it. You got your American GFS model there in that kind of purplish blue color, and then the European green color there. And again, they both kind of just show it meandering around down in the Western Caribbean. Some model runs have it a little bit further east, some have it a little bit further west, but nonetheless, it's going to just kind of hug the shoreline there down in the far Western Caribbean. Then as you head into early next week, that's when you see the big divide between what both of these models are trying to show. The European one over the last several runs has had it intensify a little bit quicker once it moves back out over the southern Gulf of Mexico and actually kind of moves it a little bit quicker towards Florida, which would not be good news for us. You can see it has a few more rings around it there. That would mean a stronger storm eventually making landfall in Florida sometime the middle of next week. A lot of models are pretty consistent. It'll be somewhere around Wednesday, give or take 12 hours or so. But then the American GFS model, as we had shown, earlier, kind of gets broken apart over land as it moves over Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula, moves out into the Gulf, quickly gets picked up then by the upper level jet and that surface cold front, and really just kind of brings, some tropical rains to much of South and Central Florida. Here on the First Coast, yes, we would see some rain from it. But as of this model comparison, the purple and blue would certainly be much lesser impacts, at least locally here on the First Coast, compared to what the European is trying to show. There's going to be a lot of different factors and ingredients involved with this. You can see just kind of a mess once you get past really Honduras there. It kind of heads towards Belize and, the Yucatan, towards Cancun. The models really begin to diverge. So over the next couple of days, just be aware of it. Now's not the time to be worried or concerned just yet. This is still a week away, so a ton of stuff in the forecast and in the models can change between now and then. We're looking at a lot of different factors, not only what's happening down in the Western Caribbean and where this storm actually tracks just within this area, but also how quickly is that cold front to make its way through. The cold front off to the northwest that we're going to be tracking, that will dictate how quickly the storm reaches us, potentially the intensity it still has. The system can often also entrain a lot of drier air on the backside, that northwest side of the storm. So it could be, a hurricane in the Gulf once the cold front reaches it and, it's pulling it towards Florida. But that drier air kind of gets entrained on the backside, begins to break it apart. Obviously, dry air is not conducive for a tropical system. And, the time it reaches Florida, it could be significantly weaker. So there's still a ton to iron out, but now's just the time to, watch it closely, but at least don't worry about it for the time being. So here's just some 3 big takeaways of what we know, at least for the time being. The storm is currently in the Western Caribbean in an area that is very conducive for tropical storm development and potentially rapid intensification. Very warm ocean water, still in the mid-80s down there. And that upper level high pressure system had that clockwise rotation would also be very helpful and conducive for that storm to grow vertically and still intensify. So rapid intensification, although it's not certain, is still certainly going to be a possibility there. A farther westward track of the storm over land would be very good for everyone across Florida, especially us here across the First Coast. That would generally lead to a much weaker storm, not spending nearly as much time over very, very warm ocean waters. But nonetheless, rain looks fairly likely on Wednesday, especially for South Florida, potentially Central Florida as well for the First Coast. Yes, I think we will see some rain. How much is still a little bit up in the air, and then also just how much wind we might see is not a given either. So there's going to be a lot to iron out in the forecast between now and then, but we're going to continue to get more data in throughout tonight, tomorrow, and I really do think by either Saturday evening, Sunday evening, we're going to have a much better idea of where this storm could potentially be headed, because we're going to have at least 2 to 3 days to watch where the storm's been at. Has it been right over the Western Caribbean Ocean, or has it, has that center of circulation really been more so over Honduras or Belize or, Mexico, where it's not fueling itself in those very warm, waters. So within the next couple of days, we're going to have a much better idea. So we're just going to have to keep close tabs on it here for the time being. Also, just wanting a quick update on the autumnal weather we have headed here towards the First Coast. Cold front's going to be working its way in tomorrow night. So until it arrives tomorrow, still going to be warm, not nearly as windy. A few isolated showers, especially in the evening, will be possible as that front rolls on through. So partly cloudy skies during the daytime hours, a little bit more of an increase in cloud cover by the late afternoon, especially throughout the evening. Again, just 1 or 2 spotty showers trying to work their way in there, but many of us will already be at home. You might even be in bed at that point, so shouldn't be anything to really worry about with regards to rain showers. By early Friday morning, 1 or 2 might linger down across our southern areas. Putnam, southern St. John's, Flatney might see 1 or 2 raindrops, but then the cooler and drier air is ushered in behind it come Friday morning. So check this out. Mid-70s for your afternoon highs there on Friday. Overnight lows then, especially for the weekend, going to be down into the low 50s. So if you've broken out any of those sweatshirts, sweatpants, maybe even a light jacket, you're probably going to need it this weekend. For both Saturday and Sunday morning, really not a big change between either of those. Very fall-like air in place, mid-70s through the weekend. Sunny skies, dry weather, so really nothing to be concerned about locally weather-wise here over the weekend. Besides, we will continue to still see some high rip currents at the beach. Tides could be about 1 to potentially even 2 feet higher than normal through at least tomorrow, or at least Friday, I should say. So keep that in mind if you do live along the intercoastal or any of our waterways or deltas, or maybe if you're just heading out to the beach and trying to surf waves out there. But then by the middle of next week, that's when we're going to be watching for that potential tropical system to make its way towards us. So here's another look at that system, and the cluster of thunderstorms slowly beginning to organize. You can kind of see those brighter reds and white colors just off to the southwest of Jamaica. That's kind of on the western side of that center of circulation. So it's going to take a while for this storm to really, pump up and grow significantly. So we're only expecting it to be a tropical storm by tomorrow, Saturday at the latest. It's going to hang out down in the Caribbean for the next several days. So nothing is imminent. You're going to have at least a week. Again, this is at least 6 to 7 days away from any potential local impacts. And you got to stay a little bit hopeful, right? We've already had 3, hurricanes make landfall in Florida this year. Hopefully, we don't have another one. So I think that is all I have for you here tonight. Again, I am meteorologist Ross Mumal. I appreciate you tuning in to this Talkin' Tropics update here on First Coast News Plus. We'll have much more for you coming up later on this evening on air and online. But